The first knock came like thunder, splintering the silence of the night. Then another, and another, each one angrier than the last. I blinked against the darkness, disoriented. The clock on the nightstand read 3:06 a.m. My old lake cabin creaked as the night wind rustled the pine trees outside. But this wasn't wind, it was fists. Relentless, intentional. Pulling on a flannel shirt, I stepped over my sleeping Labrador, Rusty, and headed to the door. Through the small window I saw red and blue lights flashing against the Trieste sheriff's cruisers idling at the base of the gravel drive. A third silhouette stood closer, arms crossed, foot tapping, her figure illuminated by the strobing lights. When I opened the door, the cold slapped me before her words did. "You're trespassing," the woman declared, her voice clipped, commanding. She wore a satin robe, slippers, and a look of absolute authority. "This property is under Silver Lake Shore's HOA jurisdiction. You are not on the authorized overnight occupancy list." The taller of the two deputies stepped forward. "Sir, are you Davis Langston?" "Yes." He hesitated, as if unsure whether to apologize or proceed. "This woman, Ms. Karen Hopkins, president of the HOA, has reported unauthorized habitation on HOA land. We're going to need to verify your residency." I stared at her. "This is my family's cabin. Been in the Langston name since 1964. I have every right to be here," Karen snorted. "History means nothing without compliance. This neighborhood adopted new bylaws last spring. Overnight stays require prior approval from the board. We mailed the notices." "I don't live under your HOA," I replied, keeping my voice even. "This cabin sits on private land." "Not according to our updated map," she said smugly, pulling out a laminated sheet from her tote. "This entire region falls within Silver Lake Shore zone. See, you're illegally occupying community land." The deputy turned to me. "Do you have ID, sir?" I handed over my license. His eyes skimmed. It then widened. He glanced at his partner, then at Karen, and back at me with newfound caution. Karen stepped closer, trying to peer at it. "Let me see." I pulled it back. "You don't need to see anything." Karen's voice rose. "You're obstructing HOA enforcement." "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "You're trespassing on my property at 3 in the morning, disturbing the peace with false accusations." The shorter deputy cleared his throat. "Mr. Langston, maybe we can head down to the station to sort this out. Voluntarily, of course." I looked past them at the lake. The moon's reflection shimmered on the water. I'd come out here for peace, for solitude. But HOA Karen didn't respect boundaries not legal, not personal. Fine. I locked the cabin behind me and followed them to the cruiser. Karen watched me leave with a satisfied smirk, arms folded like a victor in a war no one else had declared. But she had no idea what she'd just started. Back at the station, the truth unraveled quickly. My name triggered a flag in the county's database. Deputy Alvarez, who'd remained mostly silent, confirmed it before I even sat down. "Sir, just to clarify, you're the Davis Langston of the Langston Land Trust." "Yes," he turned to his partner. "We need to stop this now." An hour later, I was back in my truck, free to go. No charges, no warnings, just a handshake and an apology from Alvarez. Still, I didn't sleep when I got home. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the eastern horizon turn silver over the lake. Karen had crossed a line tonight. Not just a legal one, but a personal one. She'd invaded my home, called in law enforcement like I was some squatter, and tried to force HOA rules onto land she didn't understand. She operated with the smug certainty of someone used to getting her way, someone drunk on borrowed power. But here's the thing about power. It only works if no one challenges it, and I wasn't just anyone. She wanted a fight. Good, I owned the battlefield. By sunrise, my cabin had never felt quieter, and yet the gears in my mind roared like engines. Karen Hopkins thought she'd done something clever. Thought she'd pulled off a public shaming by dragging me out of my own home in the middle of the night. She had no idea she'd just triggered the worst kind of storm. The kind that moves slowly, quietly, and changes everything. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I pulled out the dusty lockbox from beneath my bed. Inside were deeds, maps, contracts, documents my grandfather had warned me to always keep close. He'd once told me, "In this world, land is power. The man with the paper decides who gets to breathe." At the time, I thought he was just being dramatic. Now, I realized he'd been preparing me for people like Karen. Karen saw herself as a gatekeeper, the HOA president, queen of her castle. She believed her laminated maps and fine print bylaws made her untouchable. But she had overlooked the foundation beneath her throne, literally, because Silver Lake Shores wasn't built on free land. It was leased from me. 20 years ago, my father leased portions of our family land to a developer on a 40-year ground lease, structured with ironclad clauses to retain our control. The HOA didn't own the roads. They didn't own the lake access. They didn't even own the land beneath their clubhouses. They were tenants on paper. Their entire neighborhood, a temporary arrangement with the Langston Trust, and somehow in their thirst for control, they'd forgotten that. So I called Margot Ellis. My attorney wasn't just good, she was lethal. In a pantsuit, She had a habit of drinking straight espresso while casually dismantling lawsuits like a chess grandmaster dismantling rookies. I figured it wouldn't be long before someone poked the bear, she said after I explained. What's your play? I want them reminded thoroughly and I want it done legally. No scorched earth but no hand-holding either. Then we start with the lease. I'll pull up the original contracts and highlight your retained rights. And I'll draft a scissandus to drop on her doorstep like a thunderclap. Good, I said. And dig into their HOA charter. I want to know exactly how she got into power. Karen was the type who climbed ladders she didn't build and then kicked them away once she got to the top. That kind of arrogance only existed when no one questioned it, and up until now no one had. I decided to change that. I started with the sheriff's department. Deputy Alvarez met me that afternoon in town. Can't say I'm surprised she stirred up trouble, he muttered, glancing over the edge of his coffee mug. She files more complaints than anyone in the county. Noise ordinances, trash can violations, suspicious lawn gnomes. Last month she reported a dangerous hammock. Hammock claimed it was a safety hazard to children walking by. The owner lived 2 houses down and didn't even have kids. I chuckled once, dryly. She ever pushed the boundary? With law enforcement, she tries, but she forgets this isn't a city out here. We know who really owns the land. Good, I said, because I'm about to remind the HOA of exactly that. That night, I drafted a letter not legal, not threatening, just factual. I addressed it to every homeowner in Silver Lake Shores and signed it. Davis Langston, landholder, Silver County. It detailed the true ownership of their roads, the shared facilities, and the fact that their HOA president had attempted to forcibly remove the legal landowner without cause or legal standing. Then I included a scanned copy of the original ground lease highlighting the section that stated I retained full oversight, rights of any shared use zones and lake access points. It was enough to shake the walls. Within 48 hours, word spread like fire on dry pine. I wasn't just some man in a cabin, I was the man they'd been unknowingly leasing their lives from. Karen tried to strike back, of course. She called an emergency HOA meeting, a community preservation session, as she dramatically titled it. Flyers went out. Rumors followed. I heard whispers she was preparing a formal ban on lakefront property usage without HOA clearance. Doubling down instead of backing off. Perfect. She was tightening the Newson had no idea the rope was mine. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. sharp in the Silver Lake Shores Community Hall, a building I technically owned. Though you'd never guess it, by the way. Karen strutted across the stage like she had personally chiseled it from stone. Rows of plastic folding chairs filled quickly. Residents whispered to one another in uneasy tones. Some clutched printed copies of the letter I'd sent. Others glanced up at me as I took a seat in the front row beside Margot, their eyes flickering between curiosity and something bordering on respect. Karen stepped to the podium, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too stiff and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A large projector screen behind her displayed the HOA's logo, a cartoonish lake framed by mountains, its serenity sharply at odds with the storm brewing inside the room. We're here tonight, she began, voice amplified and polished, to address certain claims made by Mr. Langston, a non-resident landholder who, regrettably, has caused significant confusion among our community. Her gaze cut briefly to me. I didn't flinch. These claims, she continued, are misleading at best and malicious. At worst, while it's true the HOA sits on leased land, that lease has no bearing on our governance. Our bylaws are legally binding. And this board, your board, has worked tirelessly to protect the standards and serenity of Silver Lake Shores. Polite claps scattered through the room, not as many as she expected. Karen pushed forward, her voice rising like a preacher at revival. This is about more than land. It's about community, safety, order. Are we going to let an outsider dictate how we live simply because he claims to have signed a piece of paper decades ago? Margot rose to her feet smoothly. Actually, she said, her tone casual but commanding, he didn't just claim it, he proved it. The room turned to her. Margot held up a thick folder and handed copies to the board members. This is the original ground lease between the Langston Trust and the developer who built your neighborhood. Section 9.4 specifically states the landowner retains discretionary authority over all shared use areas, roads, docks, clubhouses, and access easements. Karen stepped away from the mic. You're misinterpreting. I don't interrupt you, Margot said calmly. Don't interrupt me, gasps. Karen's face flushed red. I stayed seated, letting Margot drive the knife for 20 years. She continued. Mr. Langston's family allowed this community to flourish undisturbed. But when Ms. Hopkins attempted to evict him from private property with no legal standing, that grace ran out. You don't get to push someone out of their home and expect silence. A murmur swept the room. Neighbors looked at one another, some nodding, others stunned. Karen snatched the microphone. We don't answer to threats. This is our home. I stood now. Mine too, I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. I looked not at Karen but at the people, the ones who'd raised their families here, trimmed their hedges every Saturday, waved at strangers with borrowed smiles. My grandfather planted the trees around this lake. My father surveyed the land and signed the papers that allowed this community to exist. I didn't ask for this fight. I came to restore an old cabin. You woke me up at 3 a.m. and called the cops to evict me from my own property. I've shown restraint, but now I'm showing you reality. I pulled out a rolled blueprint and unrolled it across the board's table. The original parcel map. The HOA governs houses. I govern land, and this land I tapped the map isn't yours. Not really. Karen tried to interject, but someone from the audience, an older man with a worn veteran's cap, stood up. Ms. Hopkins, he said, you told us last year that the HOA had purchased these common areas outright, that we owned them collectively. Karen froze. That's what you told us, another woman added. That the lake access was ours forever. All the polish drained from Karen's face. She looked small suddenly, like a child who'd been caught in a lie. I didn't have all the documents at the time, she muttered. I do, I said, and I'll be mailing them to every household by morning. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. The board looked at each other, unsure, uneasy, don't easy don't. Then someone said it. I motioned to call a vote of no confidence in the HOA president. Seconded. Third. The room shifted. The power she'd clung to with both fists for years was slipping. Not in a shout, but in silence, in glances, in whispers. I sat down, folded my arms, and waited. Karen, she just stood there, blinking behind the podium, watching the world she thought she owned realign itself around the man she tried to erase. Karen didn't leave that night, not physically, but her power, that vanished before she stepped off the podium. The vote passed unanimously, not a single hand raised in her defense. She tried to argue procedure, called the vote illegal, claimed she'd file formal challenges, but no one listened. Her voice, once sharp enough to slice through a room, now sounded hollow. People had seen too much, heard too much. The curtain had dropped, and the illusion of control went with it. The next morning, I stood on the front porch of my cabin, coffee steaming in my hand, watching sunlight spill across Silver Lake like a secret unveiled. A quiet breeze rustled the evergreens, but the community beyond was anything but still. Word spread quickly. Karen Hopkins had been removed. A temporary committee was formed to review the HOA charter, and a formal request was filed to revise policies to reflect actual land use limitations. I stayed out of it. For me, it wasn't about running a board. It was about reclaiming peace. But peace, I learned, doesn't always arrive quietly. 2 days later, Karen showed up again, this time without her robe and smug smile. She marched down the dirt path toward my dock in gym shoes and a ball cap, flanked by a young man filming her on his phone. I watched from the porch as she unlatched the gate and stepped onto the pier. Sunglasses low on her nose. Public land, she called, her voice falsely cheerful. Thought I'd enjoy one last lake view before you bulldoze it into a parking lot. The cameraman chuckled awkwardly. I stepped down slowly, calm but unhurried. Halfway there, I gestured toward the freshly posted sign, Private ACCESS by permit of landowner only. You're trespassing, Karen, I said, meeting her at the dock. Again, she gestured dramatically toward the camera. This is harassment. I'm recording this for legal purposes. Everyone should know what kind of tyranny is happening here. No one's stopping you from filming, I replied. But if you stay on that dock another 30 seconds, you'll be filming from the back of a deputy's cruiser. You wouldn't dare. I don't need to. You already gave the sheriff enough reasons to keep you on their radar. She took a shaky breath. You think you've won? You think this makes you some kind of hero? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Instead, I handed her a padded envelope. She hesitated, then snatched it open. Inside was a full report, copies of her HOA misconduct filings, her public 911 complaint transcript, and, most damning of all, an official letter from the county clerk verifying the Langston Trust's ownership of the land the HOA occupied. This is what the new committee's reviewing, I said. They're using it to draft new transparency requirements for board members. That means no more secret votes, no more backyard power plays. Her face flushed pink, then pale. You're destroying everything we built. No, I replied, stepping closer. I'm protecting what we built from people who forgot who they work for. She opened her mouth to fire back, but the words died somewhere between thought and breath. Then, with a small scoff and a turn of her heel, she walked back down the dock, camera boy trailing behind her like a misplaced shadow. I stayed until they disappeared into the trees. Later that week, the new committee posted updates, a full audit of HOA funds, a rollback of half the restrictive bylaws Karen had forced through, and most telling of all, a motion to establish a landowner liaison role to ensure no future conflict arose between residents and the people whose land they lived on. They offered me the position. I declined. Instead, I offered them a deal. Freeze all lease rates for 10 years in exchange for a formal acknowledgement of the Langston Trust's oversight. They agreed. Unanimously. I'd won, but not through noise, or threats, or grandstanding. I won with patience, with proof, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your right hand holding the paper to back it up. That night, I lit a fire in the old stone pit by the lake, Rusty curled up by my feet, the stars above, brighter than I'd seen in years. No sirens. No pounding fists. Just stillness, because the woman who tried to evict me no longer ruled this place, and the man she woke at 3 a.m. He now owned the silence she once feared.